In 2003, I lived for a little while in Glasgow, Scotland. I played in a pub band, and after making friends with a bunch of older Scottish musicians and artists, I had a chance to engage people and parts of the city that I would have never encountered otherwise. One of those people was a guy named Jimmy. Jimmy was animated and loud. He played about every instrument you could possibly imagine, and he stayed up singing songs late into the night. As the only Texan who played in the band, Jimmy always asked me to play Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson songs. He also liked to have a good time, and that meant that when you were with him, you never knew exactly what you would do or where you would go or who you would meet. One afternoon, Jimmy asked if I wanted to ride with him to a friend's house. I can't remember exactly what we were doing. Maybe it was a visit, picking up an instrument. All I remember is this moment that happened and what he said to me. I noticed that the trip was taking longer than expected. Even though I didn't know the neighborhood, it looked like we were circling around the same streets over and over again multiple times. And then the usually very animated, very talkative Jimmy got quiet. He drove in silence as we passed the same homes and landmarks again and again. Then he pulled his car over to the side of the road, and he looked at me and in this heavy Glaswegian accent said, "You know, Aaron, the wonderful thing about getting lost is that when you are, nothing else in the whole world matters." Jimmy was right. Now, this happened to us before we all carried high-powered GPS devices in our pockets and our phones everywhere. My guess is that my children will never know the full experience of really being physically lost, having to find their way from one place to another like so many of us have. And that might be a bad thing, because being lost, body and soul, being in the wilderness, finding out how to make meaning there and get out, has a lot to teach us. In her book, A Field Guide to Getting Lost, Rebecca Solnit points to some of the insights that come from this experience. And she says, in that reading that we heard this morning, she says that the primary experience of being lost and what it teaches us comes from a lack of control. When you lose things, she said, you're the same, but the world is missing something. Getting lost, she said, is a little different, but still a lack of control. All of a sudden, when you are lost, when you're in the wilderness, the world is bigger than your knowledge of it and bigger than your control. I know that you already know it's not just about losing our keys or needing direction. There are moments in our lives when uncertainty feels so strong that the entire world, maybe even our own identities and families and workplaces and countries, maybe tomorrow feels beyond your knowledge or control. Those are wilderness moments for all of us. Maybe it's a time when you were concerned about your health and didn't have answers and maybe didn't want to know the answers. Or it's a time of deep uncertainty in your family or your relationship or love or your job or the state of your city or your nation. Those wilderness moments are the ones where we stay up late into the night wondering how we will make it through tomorrow. Now, that kind of uncertainty is a hard feeling for a reason. Baked deep into our DNA is the desire to understand the world and to be able to control it. We have inherited that anxiety from our grandmother's grandmother many times back. You survive when you try to predict in orderly fashion when the sun comes up and how to get home and which animals and plants are dangerous. We survive because we build order into the world and find predictable patterns. And so when the uncertainty is so deep in our lives, it can feel like we're not going to make it through it. However, like most things in life, the challenge is that the great lesson is often delivered right in the middle of the great discomfort. That uncertainty, that feeling of being lost, that moment when it feels like you're in the wilderness part of your life and don't know how to make meaning or find safety there or to find a way out, that's when a new world is being born. That's when there's possibility that you have never seen before. That's where there's a capability in you and in your life that you never knew you had. That's where you are being born into the world again and again, as if for the first time. The wilderness can be an especially rich place for our growth and new life and a new world. In the church year, we're in a season called Advent. It's the 4 weeks preceding Christmas. And in the Christian writings and in a lot of church settings, it's all about stories leading up to the Christmas story. It's about waiting. It's about anticipation, knowing the new and better world is possible, but it's just not here yet. Think about those moments in your life where you can see it. You can see that new life. You can see that new person. You can see that new job or that change, and it's just not here yet, but you know it's about to arrive. That's the wilderness. In Christian scriptures, the Advent season, the anticipation of a new world, usually begins by telling stories about John the Baptist. The texts tell stories about a man who is out in the desert, wild-eyed, dirty, and wild-haired, telling people that there's a way to turn over their life and live a new, better kind of way in the world. The texts say that he wears a shirt made out of camel hair and he survives by eating locusts and honey. He stood at the banks of the Jordan River proclaiming to anyone who would listen that a new life and a new world was possible. And before the image of a baptism was something that your brother-in-law did before brunch or posted pictures of on Facebook, this wild-eyed, dirty man screaming in the desert was holding people and plunging them into the water, symbolizing a death, raising them up and saying, you can live a different kind of life. A new world is coming. And that message came from a wild man eating bugs, screaming in the desert. The wilderness can be a creative place. Think of stories of people like Jesus or the Buddha. Religious literature is rich with these stories for a reason. In fact, in both of those cases, the narratives say that both Jesus and the Buddha go out into the wilderness on their own and sit in the midst of nature alone in danger, both for 40 days, before their largest insights and connections with the sacred and their work in the world truly take shape in its full impact. In both cases, the stories talk of Jesus and the Buddha sitting alone in the wilderness and being met by their own demons. The stories say that in the wilderness they met monsters and devils and demons who came to them with voices that said, "Who do you think you are out here? Do you think you can do this? Do you think you're special? Why don't you go back to a safe, comfortable, predictable life? Let's give you money or sex or food or security or power. Just don't try anything new. Who do you think you are?" The stories say that in the wilderness, they met their shadow. They met temptation. They met their fears, the ideas that maybe they would not survive, that their new mission wouldn't take hold, that they would be failures or mocked or harmed. But they didn't give in. They found their meaning in the wilderness of their lives, and thank goodness they did. That wilderness feeling can be terrible. And why not? It's terrifying to think that our health might be at stake and we don't know why. Or to think that we don't know how we'll make a living or who we'll live with or who we'll love or where we'll be in life or whether we'll fail at our biggest dreams. In the midst of that fear, so many of us choose complacency or worse. In the face of the wilderness, so many of us choose to live an even smaller life. We will do almost anything sometimes to avoid that wilderness feeling. In the Hebrew Bible, there's this famous passage where the Israelites have just escaped slavery in Egypt. They're being led by Moses, and they're going through the desert. They're in the desert in a wilderness period of their own for 40 years, but right after they get away, they've just escaped violence and oppression and slavery. They're running through the desert. They've just outrun their captors. And the first thing they do is say, "What are we doing out here in the desert?" They say to Moses, "Don't bother us. Let us stay. Let us go back and serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to stay slaves than to come out here and die in the desert where there are not enough graves in Egypt." They say, "Now we're free, but we don't know where our next meal will come from." And they're scared. And they start to say as a group that even servitude or suffering with certainty is better than the freedom that comes with uncertainty and the wilderness. I understand that feeling. And I think a lot of us do. How often have you chosen a smaller life that you knew was too small for you? Because it felt harder to face the unknown. Once you walked out the door, or left your job, or tried a new dream, how often have you chose a constricted, or maybe even a life of suffering? Because at least it was certain, and it wasn't as scary as the unknown or the wilderness. Sometimes the idea of the uncertainty can be so strong that we will choose toxic, abusive relationships, or soul-sucking jobs, or moments when we know we are wasting the precious days of our life and our gifts. But at least we know what today and tomorrow will look like. We will sometimes risk the well-being of our bodies and spirits to not have to risk the unknown. However, as Rebecca Solnit talked about in that reading, there is a richness to be found in getting lost if we do it right. She says the wilderness feeling can cause us to be completely present to the moment in front of us. It can confront us with who we really are, what we're truly capable of, parts of ourselves that we don't even know about yet. That the goal is not to avoid being lost in life, but to practice a life where we do it well. Jimmy was right. The amazing thing about being lost is that when you are, nothing else matters. It can reduce life down to its simplest terms and say, this is important. For me, one of the keys to being prepared in life for wilderness moments, for those times when you will feel lost in life, is to cultivate and carry with you something that is so good, so beautiful every day of your life that no matter who you are, where you are, how lost you feel, there's something you can never lose. It's different for everybody. Maybe it's the love of your life. Maybe it's the love of children. Maybe it's your art or your music, your connection with God. But if you practice holding on to something so beautiful, cultivating something so precious and good, no matter where you are, you can't lose that. I saw a video recently of a woman who had been a famous ballerina. Early in her life, she was masterful on the stage. Later in life, she suffered with dementia, had lost so much of her ability to remember, even to move her body. But when she was played Tchaikovsky, every memory of her beautiful dancing came to the fore, and she was able to give recollection of it and move her body just as if she was there decades and decades ago. It was not lost to her. I'd like to show that to you now. So here's this woman who had cultivated and practiced the art of making beauty with her body in rhythm with the music, who had practiced the skill to move in the most difficult movements and moments, this control, this beauty. And even in a time when it seemed like her own body and memory were betraying her, even in a time where she probably felt lost in her own room, nothing could take that away. That beauty she had cultivated would never leave. And that can be us too. If you practice connecting to something so good, so precious, that it would move your body and your soul even to think about it, you will never be truly lost. You can practice getting lost in life because it will happen by greeting those moments by knowing that it's an opportunity to ask what is truly important here. Like Jimmy said in the car that day, or like Rebecca Solnit said, being lost can cause us to be present to what is like nothing else. The next time you're in the wilderness, ask yourself, what is this teaching me about what truly matters? It can teach us things like nothing else can. And finally, remember that being lost is an opportunity to surprise ourselves. There are strengths that you have never encountered yet. No matter how old you are, no matter how competent you feel, there are things you can do, obstacles you can overcome, wisdom and insights that you can have, strength you can give, love you can give that you had no idea you were capable of. And often, the simple life, the easy life, the predictable life does not require us to show those new skills and gifts. Being lost can reveal ourselves to us in ways nothing else can. The wilderness, and there will be wilderness, can show us gifts we never thought we'd have. The wilderness can be the place where we're required to hold and shine the beauty we have been cultivating our entire lives. The wilderness can highlight what and who is really worthy of our trust. And it might sound counterintuitive, but the only life worth having is the life that doesn't feel safe or predictable or routine. The only life really worth having is a life filled with uncertainty and wilderness. Because if you love somebody, if you really, really love somebody, they can always walk away, and sometimes will. If you have a vision, a big dream, something you are proud about that animates your spirit, and you want to bring that into the world, it can fail, and sometimes will. If you love being alive, you will know that the body and mind that are a part of your life can fail you, and sometimes will. And one day, we give it all back and don't know when that day is. To live is to be in the wilderness. It was not better in Egypt. Servitude or suffering with certainty is not better than the freedom that comes with the wilderness. There is a good life waiting for all of us. A life looking ahead. And that means so much unknown. It means so much wilderness. And if you hold on to what is truly beautiful and precious in your life, if you practice that good, then you can dance in the midst of it. And if you know that the wilderness reveals what's truly important, then in that moment of your life where it feels like everything is lost, you can point to that and say, that is worthy of my trust. And you will find a new self being born, often in the desert, often feeling wild, but one that knows new life and new love. It is waiting for each and every one of us. Amen.